This scene is clearly not the most realistic in terms of models and composition, but it's one I put together relatively quickly in order to showcase the features, benefits, and downsides of bakery. This scene includes multiple lights of varying types that are shining on the same surfaces, something which Unity's default Lightmapper can't handle very well. The first thing you should notice is that while there is sun shining on part of the floor, most of the scene is lit indirectly. The indirect lighting partially comes from some of the indirect lighting from other light sources, but much of it comes from the sky, or in this case, the skylight. If you click on it, you can adjust its settings like its indirect intensity, which can help give the impression of more light coming from the sky. It's especially useful for more overcast scenes, where indirect lighting coming from the sky plays a prominent role in establishing the mood of the scene. The indirect multiplier in the rendering settings will multiply off of this value. If you have the indirect intensity set to 2 for the skylight and 3 to the scene, then the indirect intensity of the skylight will now be 6. If you look at the surfaces, you can see the specular highlights. These are baked specular highlights that are made possible by using the SH mode of bakery. As you can see, they're not as accurate as real-time specular highlights, but this feature isn't available at all in the dominant direction mode, and in many scenes, simply having specular highlights present is a lot more important than their accuracy. If I look at the scene from top down, you can see how the specular highlights seem to merge into one another sometimes, like here. You can also see how the specular highlights appear at the borders of shadows, such as the shadow cast by the sun. On both simple and more complex models, you can see how the accuracy of the specular highlights are not perfect. The issues that come from using baked specular highlights are less noticeable on surfaces that are not as smooth. If I apply a different material to the floor, for example, you can see how the problems that were more prominent on the smooth surface are not as pronounced on this newer, rougher surface. Note that the global illumination of the scene did not update when I slapped on the new material. I would have to rebake for that to happen, but the baked specular and all of the other light map data was now applied to this new surface. While the cube map light can be a cool effect, you can see some of the issues it has when using it in conjunction with baked specular highlights. The highlights seem to merge into each other. As such, this light may be better suited to scenes without specular highlights, or with surfaces that are more diffused. In addition, it also doesn't look great because of the low light map resolution. Either increase that, or the scale in light map of the surrounding objects to a cube map light, so the lighting result appears clearer and more defined. These are some shortcomings of baked specular highlights, but most people probably won't even notice these too much. Simply having specular highlights at all significantly increases realism. They're not 100% accurate, but it's sort of like how cube maps give imperfect reflections of the scene. It contributes to the scene's believability, but if people are focusing on the graphics of the scene, then what's really in need of improvement a lot of the time is the scene's visual composition. There are plenty of ways to improve visual composition, even with a photorealistic art style and an interactive scene. Honestly, the visual composition in this test scene is pretty weak, but that's kind of the point so I can more easily show off the features of bakery. If I were to make this scene look any better, then I would not pour more time into improving the graphics. Instead, I would use that time to look at visual reference and figure out how I could make the scene appear more believable. Believability, consistency, composition, and aesthetics are far more important factors to the immersion in a virtual environment than graphics. So of course, having more realistic graphics that can produce more consistent results always helps. Under this couch, you can see the difference with specular occlusion on versus off. It's much more realistic when the Fresnel effect is removed from that dark area. If I adjust the specular occlusion on the couch itself, you can see how it not only seems to take away the Fresnel from the dark spots, but also to the average user it appears to add more detailed self-shadowing. This shows just how much the standard shader was holding back our scene, and it now looks much closer to what would be found in the more advanced Unreal Engine. If you look at the top of the scene, you can see concrete tiles with noticeable indents. But if I go closer to the surface, you can see the illusion starts to break a bit. That's because this is simply using a height map. By using the lit shader, it allows for greater control of these height maps, aka displacement maps. Besides the strength, the other important control here is the steps. And you can see how more of them increases the quality of the illusion. However, having many steps or even using a height map at all is relatively computationally expensive. So only use height maps when they make a noticeable difference to the material, and then use as few steps as you can get away with. Keep in mind the places where people are going to be looking at your material from, and then adjust the height map from those viewpoints. For example, this material here on the ceiling is not going to be viewed from any higher than, say, 2 meters. So that's where I'll place my camera in the scene and then adjust the settings until the illusion no longer appears to increase in quality. Now let's look at the metal vents on the ceiling. Most of the time you see metallic surfaces in VR chat, they don't look very good. However, this one looks far more realistic. It's achieved through a combination of using several PBR maps and a box projected reflection probe, in addition to some of the features of the lit shader and bakery. Some of those features include the baked specular highlights, GSAA, which can remove aliasing artifacts caused by specular highlights, and specular occlusion, which again can remove reflections from places where they shouldn't be visible. I can also slap a different metallic material onto the floor for another example of a metallic surface taking advantage of some of the aforementioned features. Hey, you just saw a small slice of my bakery mega tutorial, available exclusively to patrons. The full tutorial is by far the longest video I've made, clocking in at 45 minutes. I cover many of the features of this powerful tool, as well as how to use it in conjunction with physically based materials and get it working with VR chat. I believe that this is the single most important tutorial I have made thus far, as it shows how to make your Unity scenes far more technically impressive and bring them closer to graphics you might see in the more advanced Unreal Engine. I show just how much vanilla Unity was holding us back and how to overcome those limitations. So if you want to bring your Unity scenes or VR chat worlds to the next level, then this is the video for you. Subscribe to the tutorial tier or higher on my Patreon to get access to the full mega tutorial today.